much like here tonight. Maybe a little puffy white cloud going by. Ordinary night. The sheep were out in their fold. Not a single one of the sheep had ever won a blue ribbon at the Houston livestock show. Not a single one. They were ordinary sheep, some fat, some old, some scrawny. Just sheep, normal sheep. Nothing unusual, very ordinary. A shepherd or two was there, and these shepherds were always ordinary. They had everything they owned. All the clothes they had in the world were on their back. They lived with sheep. They smelled like sheep. They were the untouchables in the Middle East. They couldn't worship in the temple because they were unclean. They were not accepted in a court of law because they thought they were ignorant and unworthy. They were the throwaways of the society. Shepherds. Ordinary sheep, ordinary shepherds, ordinary night in a Middle Eastern little town called Bethlehem. We have gotten to the point, ladies and gentlemen, when we celebrate Christmas, for most of us, it becomes ordinary. At my house, we have so many nativity scenes, you wouldn't believe it. We've collected them through the years. People have given us nativity scenes. And you can walk to any room in my house, almost without exception, and there's 1 or 2 or 3 nativity scenes. And I even noticed this time, we have a nativity scene, and most of them have the same thing, right? They have a star, have a stable, they have the shepherds, they have the wise men, they have Mary and Joseph and the baby, and they have goats or sheep. But I've got a nativity scene that even has a chicken. You've never seen that. A chicken. Sort of out of place in the normal nativity scenes. But we look at all of this, and it's sort of ordinary. Christmas again. This is the way Christmas is expressed, with nativity scenes. But I want us this Christmas Eve to zoom in on some very ordinary things when we think of Christmas and those nativity scenes, and discover something about ordinary things when Jesus gets involved. First of all, I want us to look at an ordinary star. We know that star in the east guided those wise men, probably from Mesopotamia, between the Tigris and Euphrates River, and that star brought them all the way to Jerusalem and then to Bethlehem until those wise men were at the very feet of Jesus. How did that happen? A star led them. That star was the first, I believe, GPS system in all the world. It was a travel guide that led them all the way to Jesus. By the way, what is a star? I dare say few of us could give a definition. A star is some helium and hydrogen, a little bit of carbon, and it's held together by gravity. And stars are flung all over the universe. That's what a star is. When a star burns out, it puts a black hole in our cosmos. That's where the black holes come from. The stars have burned out. What a story. How big are stars, by the way? Did anybody know? A few of us. The small stars are about 124 miles in diameter, small stars. The large stars are almost 622,000 miles to the diameter. They are humongous, as children would say. They are bigger than big. Therefore, how many stars do you think are in our solar system? Every grain of sand on every beach in the world, multiplied by 10, whatever that number would be. How many trillion, billion, I don't know the name for it. You multiply all those grains of sand by 10, and we have more stars in our solar system than that. When I bumped into that, I didn't know it. I was stunned. And I said, God, how great thou art. How great thou art. And then I thought about Psalm 8. The psalmist says, when I consider the heavens, the work of thy fingers, the moon and the stars thou hast ordained, the psalmist says, what is man that thou art mindful of him? Isn't that what we come to see? In light of the vastness, the amazingness of the created order that we know a little bit about, not the billion and billion of other constellation and orders that are all over this unknown world, just the little bit we know about. We say what the psalmist says, God, what is man? What is a human being that you are mindful of him? Then he said, or the son of man that you visited him. God visited this planet. Whew. That's Christmas. That's Christmas. And God came and said, let me tell you who you are as a human being. You were created just a notch below angels. Human beings, we're just a notch below the angels. And he says, you are charged with being responsible for this creation, for the firmament. You're responsible for the animals. You're responsible for the fish. You're responsible for the stewardship because I have put you there in charge of all that I have done in the world order. What a lofty position. And then the psalmist says, the glory of God is declared in the heavens. I look at the heavens and I find the glory of God. So we go all the way to Bethlehem. And we go from Bethlehem all the way back to the Middle East, all the way back to Mesopotamia. And we see that star that guided those wise men. The heavens declare the glory of God. The heavens declared the glory of God to those wise men. Think about it. What do you think it would take? What do you think it would take to take these mystical stargazers who probably worked for the king to look at the heavens and determine that this is a divine, once, perhaps in forever event? What was that supernatural thing? That ordinary star that became an extraordinary star. What did it consist of? First of all, those mystics looked into the heavens and they saw a lion. They saw the constellation. They saw the lion, and they knew the lion always stood for Israel. And then they looked around and they saw something else. They saw not just a lion that stood for Israel in that whole light being that was created in the heavens. They looked and saw Venus, a planet. And they know that Venus stood for motherhood. And then they looked and they saw Jupiter. And Jupiter, they knew, always stood for kingship. And then they looked and they saw something else. They saw Romulus, which always stood for divinity, that always stood for royalty. So those stargazers, they saw all of those four lined up. A constellation, two planets, and a star, and that would compose the GPS system that guided those wise men all the way to the foot of Jesus. That has never before happened in history and never again will happen in history. Oh God, how great thou art. You see, ladies and gentlemen, God always has a tour guide to lead anybody and everybody, anytime, any place, all the way to Jesus. You can't miss it if you're observing, if you're alert. What is God? Where is that tour guide in your life? Where is that star in your life? Somebody that says, get it together. Find a new life. Wake up. Look up. Look out. Jesus Christ wants to take your life and give you a brand new life. No more addictions. No more filth. A new being. A new being in this world. You see, God always has a GPS for you. Always has a GPS for me. And we have to find out what that is. Look around. It's right there that will lead you to Christ. That'll lead you into the church where you can grow and worship and be fed and nourished and become what God designed you to become. He always has a guide there for us. Don't miss it. Respond to it. So we focus on the star, and then I want us to focus on something else. I want us to focus on the cave, perhaps it was, the stable, perhaps it was, where Jesus was born. A star became an extraordinary star because God used it. And then we see that stable. Well, there's stables everywhere, all around the world, especially in Bethlehem area. What made this stable special? Because Jesus was born there. What made that star extraordinary and special? Because it guided them to Jesus. And that stable, what a place for a baby to be born. Think about it. The first air that Jesus would breathe would be have the stench of animal urine, would it not? The sounds, the smell, untidiness. Look, the stable. It looks to me like if God could prepare a star, that those planets, the constellations, and guide all the wise men, couldn't he have provided, the Bethlehem General Hospital for Jesus to be born? Wouldn't that work? Or maybe the Ritz-Carlton hotel, that'd been better. This is God in human flesh. But he didn't. God, with great intentionality, determined that his son would be born in a filthy animal stable. Why? Why? It's so that all of us would understand that when divinity came into time and place in history, divinity didn't carry with it sort of a gilded life, a special kind of blessing, special kind of protection, with all the trappings of the elite. Instead, divinity came into life in the lowest possible common denominator. Lowest possible common denominator. Jesus, before he was 1 year old, was a refugee. Yep, they had to run to Egypt, remember? Jesus, in all probability, Joseph would have died early, and Jesus had to be the oldest child in a family raised by a mom alone. Jesus worked as a construction worker the first 30 years of his life. Jesus, when he needed friends, they turned on him and cursed him and denied him. Jesus died, what some people believe, one of the most horrific deaths anyone can die. Does that sound like a specially privileged life? No, the stable tells a story that any of us back up and say, God, you don't understand. He say, I lost my boy too. I've been where you've been. I have gone through the bottom of shame and persecution and misunderstanding. See, he was born in a stable so that he can identify with anybody and everybody, and nobody can say, God, you're not treating me fair, because Jesus took upon himself all the hardship that anyone can endure. That stable, focus on that stable. That stable becomes not an ordinary place for animals, but an extraordinary place because it is a symbol of how far God has gone to identify with anybody and everybody and any position of life. And then I want us to take and kind of focus in and zero in on one other thing in that nativity scene, and that's the manger. I don't believe many of us in the 21st century even know what a manger was, except for this Christmas story. I don't think, what is it? We wouldn't know that, most of us. A manger was a trough, a piece of farm furniture, probably crudely constructed. But the manger had eminence and became the cradle for a king when that little smidgen of scripture says, Mary laid him in the manger. And a manger, a feed trough, ordinary became extraordinary because Jesus was placed in the manger. Listen, anytime Jesus is placed anywhere, anytime Jesus is allowed to live in somebody's heart and life, the ordinary person, the ordinary challenges becomes extraordinary because they have the touch of divinity on it. The touch of divinity. A manger. So we hear, if you go to services like this, well, make out of your heart a manger for Jesus to be born. Okay, that sounds good. Jesus in any life changes that life inside and out. So make a manger, let Jesus be born. How does that work? Let me tell you exactly how it works. The book of James, chapter 4 says, draw near to God, okay, and he'll draw near to you. That's the deal. Draw near to God, and he'll draw near to you. You want to be near to God? You want to be close to God? You want to know God? Draw near to God. He'll draw near to you. So you say, okay, what do I have to do to draw near to God? James tells us, chapter 4, same passage. He says, have to have clean hands. Clean hands. I can't go to God. You can't go to God where our hands are dirty. Our lives are not pure. Our lives are not clean. Have to have clean hands. First thing. And you have to have a pure heart, James says. What does that mean? Your motives have to be right. Why do you write that card? Why do you care? Why do you ask? What is the compassion? What's your motive? What's my motive? Always we have to deal with motive. So if we're going to be near to God, we got to first of all clean up our lives, clean up our acts. Christ does that. Then we've got to test our motives, let him purify our life. And then it says you have to humble yourself before the Lord. Humble yourself before the Lord. I like that old boy says, you know, I'm a lot more humbler than I used to be. My goodness. How do you humble yourself before the Lord? It's like somebody said to someone, I've got good news and bad news. Which one do you want first? He said, well, I want the bad news first because the good news may counteract it. He said, okay, what's the bad news? And God would say to us, the bad news is you can't run your life, make all the choices in your life, and end up with a lifestyle that's worth living. Did you get that? The bad news is you and I can't run our own lives and end up with a life that's really successful and worth living and has relevance to it. Okay, that's bad news. Because I sure want to run my own life. And I can guarantee everybody here wants to run their own life. The bad news is when we do that, we never really have life. The good news is that Jesus Christ can come into anybody's life. I don't care how long it is, how jaded you are, how confused you are, how lost you are, how empty you are, how lonely you are. God can come into any life and say, hey, let me take over that life. That's the good news. And then you'll have a capital L-I-F-E, life. Life. That's how it works. Imagine that you're a figure skater. You've worked on the ice all your life. When you were a little bitty toddler, you began to ice skate, and you loved it, and you disciplined yourself. You had athletic ability and talent, and you became a very proficient ice skater until finally the day came which you tried out for the Olympics, and you accepted in the Olympics, And now you're an ice skating champion, and your whole goal in life is to win the gold medal in skating in the Olympics. You've gone through all the preliminary events. Bang, 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 bang. It's the finals. You're ahead of all the other skaters from the other nation. All you have to do is that final performance with the music and the crowd and the world watching. You're in the Olympics. And you're warming up for the event of your life. I've got one question. Are you nervous? Anybody nervous? Spent your whole life to get this moment. Now you're warming up for the final event. Are you nervous? You bet your boots you're nervous. You're saying, oh, Lord, I want to perform. I've trained, I've worked all my life. I'm here at the moment I've always dreamed of and asked for. And you're just petrified. But you're warming up. And your coach comes over there and says, hey, come here. What in the world? You skate over there? And your coach says, listen, I've just talked to the judge, the chairman of the board that'll judge this event, and he told me that you're so far ahead of everybody that you've already won the gold. You're already Olympic champion. Said you can go out there and fall down 15 times. You'll still win. And you say, thank you. And you continue warming up. And I've got a question. You're going to skate the last event of your life before the watching world, and you know whatever happens, you've already won the Olympic gold. How will you skate? How will you skate? I'll tell you how you'll skate. You'll skate